All right, so you want to talk trading psychology. Let's talk trading in the zone. We're going to dive into this idea of why so many traders chase those hot stock tips, they obsess over charts, and they still can't seem to make it work consistently.
Yeah, it's a really common struggle. And I think what's so interesting is how Mark Douglas tackles this whole thing. He starts by dissecting how we analyze the market in the first place.
Okay, so he doesn't just jump straight into like the mental game stuff.
No, he doesn't. He actually starts with the more classic approaches,
Interesting.
like fundamental analysis and technical analysis.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of a fundamentals guy myself.
Yeah.
I love digging into a company's financials, but even I know that only gets you so far.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Douglas is getting at. He calls it the reality gap. He says fundamental analysis often misses a pretty crucial element, which is the human element.
Right. You can have the perfect spreadsheet, but if everyone else is panicking and selling, your numbers don't mean much, right?
Exactly.
It's all about psychology.
It's not enough to know what something is worth on paper. You have to understand how people are actually valuing it in the real world right now.
It's true, and that's where, I guess, technical analysis comes in, right? Trying to decode those charts like we're predicting the weather.
Precisely. Technical analysis shifts the focus to market patterns, looking for those repeatable signals in all the noise and chaos.
Yeah.
And Douglas argues it's a more effective approach because it acknowledges that the market often behaves irrationally.
Okay, so that makes sense. But here's where my brain starts to melt a little bit. Even if you can spot those patterns, even with the technical tools Douglas is saying, there's still this like missing ingredient. He says you need to learn to think like a trader. What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I wish it were as simple as some kind of secret handshake, but
Right.
it's really about rewiring your brain to understand that your biggest edge isn't a technical indicator or some kind of magic formula.
Yeah.
It's your own psychology.
Oh boy.
It's about mastering your emotions and, more importantly, your reactions to those emotions.
So we're not just battling the market, we're battling our own brains.
You got it. And, this is something that I think a lot of new traders don't fully grasp, because even if you have the perfect system, right? Like even if you figured out some system that works flawlessly, if you can't execute it consistently because you're letting your emotions like fear and greed call the shots, you're dead in the water.
Well, that's a terrifying and accurate analogy.
Yeah, and Douglas really drives this point home throughout the book.
So how do we do that? How do we escape those emotional traps and actually start thinking like a trader? Where do we even begin?
Well, Douglas argues that it all starts with understanding a fundamental paradox of trading.
Okay.
He says it's both a gift and a curse.
Interesting. Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's unpack that a little bit. What's the gift?
Well, the gift is freedom. Unlike a traditional job, you're not beholden to a boss or a rigid schedule. You have the potential to create your own success on your own terms.
All right, I can definitely get behind that. But what's the catch? What's the curse that comes with all that freedom?
Well, the curse is that this freedom can actually be paralyzing. With no external structure, no boss, breathing down your neck.
Yeah.
You have to create your own discipline. You have to create your own rules. And that's where so many traders stumble.
Yeah.
They crave that freedom, but they're not willing to actually build the framework to support it.
It's like being given a blank canvas and you've got all the paint colors you could ever want, but no paintbrush.
Exactly. You've got all this potential, but you have no way to actually harness it.
Right.
And that lack of structure, that's where it can lead to some really dangerous pitfalls, which Douglas dives into in detail.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's dive into those pitfalls. What are we up against here?
Yeah.
So we've got this incredible freedom as traders, but no boss, no rules, no guardrails. Seems like a recipe for disaster if we're not careful.
It can be, and that's why Douglas, he spends a lot of time talking about these common pitfalls that traders fall into. And I think one of the biggest ones he highlights is this failure to take responsibility.
Yeah.
It's really easy to get caught up in blaming the market for our losses, right? Like, the market's out to get me, the market's rigged, whatever it is.
Right.
But the reality is the market doesn't care about our opinions or our trading accounts.
So blaming the chessboard for a bad move.
Exactly. And, I've been guilty of this myself. It's so easy to fall into that trap of if only this hadn't happened, or if only the Fed hadn't done this or whatever.
Right.
But the reality is we're the ones making the trades right.
We are.
We're the ones pushing the buttons. And so we need to own the outcomes, whether they're good or bad.
It's about shifting from a victim mindset to a creator mindset. We're not just along for the ride. We're the ones behind the wheel.
I love that analogy. Because it's so true. We're in the driver's seat. And that kind of leads us to another really fascinating pitfall that Douglas explores, which is this idea of the addiction to random rewards.
Oh, random rewards. Okay. Yeah,
Eh,
this is sounding dangerously familiar.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of those experiments with monkeys where like they'll give a monkey a reward randomly for completing a task?
I think so, yeah.
And it turns out that when you reward the monkey randomly, it actually becomes more hooked on the unpredictable payoff than if you were to reward it consistently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it creates this addictive loop that's really hard to break.
Okay, I'm starting to see the parallel here. It's like the gamble who just keeps feeding the slot machine, even though they've lost way more than they've won.
Exactly. And trading can absolutely have that same allure. We get fixated on those big wins, those moments when like everything aligns perfectly and we're like, I knew it. I'm a genius. But the reality is it might have just been luck.
Right, we need to be careful not to confuse a random reward with actual edge.
Exactly. And that's where, it's so easy to get caught in that trap. And that's something that Douglas really encourages us to watch out for.
But how do we actually do that, though? Because like you said, those big wins, they
Right.
feel so good.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
How do we break free from that cycle of chasing those dopamine hits?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And this is where it gets really interesting because Douglas argues that it all boils down to recognizing that we can't control the market. We can't force it to give us what we want when we want it.
So it's not about controlling the market. It's about controlling ourselves, our decisions, our reactions to what the market's doing.
Exactly. You've got it. It's a really subtle but incredibly crucial distinction
Okay.
because when we try to control the market, that's when we set ourselves up for like just disappointment and frustration.
Where like you can't will the market to go up just because you need it to.
Exactly. But when we focus on the things that we can control, right, our own actions and reactions,
Yeah.
that's when we empower ourselves to actually make clear-headed decisions.
It's like the difference between trying to steer a tornado and building a really sturdy storm shelter.
That's a great analogy
Yeah.
because you're right. You can't stop the tornado from coming, but you can prepare for it. And that's really where, the real work of thinking like a trader, this is where it all begins.
Okay, so where do we begin? How do we build that storm shelter?
Well, Douglas argues that it starts with recognizing just how powerful our beliefs about the market actually are.
Okay, beliefs, this is something that I've always found a little bit vague. Like, how do our beliefs actually manifest in our trading? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, absolutely. Douglas uses a really fascinating illustration in the book. He talks about this experiment called the free money experiment. So picture this. There's a man standing on a busy street corner, right?
Okay.
And he's holding a sign that literally says free money. He's got like a stack of cash and he's just offering it to anyone who walks by, no strings attached.
Wait, free money. Sign me up. Who wouldn't take him up on that offer?
You'd be surprised. In this experiment, very few people actually did.
Really?
Yeah, most people just like walked on by. Some people even like actively avoided him.
No way, free money right there for the taking, and they just ignored it.
It sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened.
I mean, there's got to be a catch.
There was no catch, and that's the point. Their pre-existing beliefs about how the world works prevented them from seeing this incredible opportunity that was literally right in front of them.
Wow, so their beliefs were like blinders almost.
Exactly. Like blinders preventing them from seeing what was right there in front of them.
That's wild.
And that's what Douglas is getting at when it comes to trading.
Okay.
We all have these pre-existing beliefs about the market, right? About risk, about our own abilities. And these beliefs, often unconscious, act as filters.
So even if we've got all the technical analysis down, even if we're working on our discipline and emotional control, these hidden beliefs could still be like tripping us up without us even realizing it.
That's exactly what Douglas is saying. And it's something that he really encourages us to examine.
Okay, so if our own brains are working against us in all these ways, how do we even begin to like rewire those thought patterns? How do we escape those mental traps and start thinking like the traders that we want to be? So we are battling our own brains, our hidden beliefs, this addiction to those random rewards. It's a lot. How do we even begin to rewire our thinking? Where do we start?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Douglas's answer might surprise you. He says it all starts with embracing uncertainty.
Okay, easier said than done, right? Like uncertain, that can be really scary, especially in trading. Every trade can feel like a total coin toss.
It's true, and I think that's why so many traders get stuck, because they're desperately seeking certainty in a realm where it simply doesn't exist.
Exactly. So how can we get comfortable with not knowing what's going to happen next?
Well, he says it's about shifting our perspective. Instead of trying to predict every twist and turn in the market,
Yeah.
think of a casino.
Okay.
The casino doesn't try to predict the outcome of every spin of the roulette wheel or every hand of blackjack, right? They focus on the overall odds.
Okay.
They've accepted that uncertainty is just like it's baked into the game,
Yeah.
and they've structured their entire business model around it.
So they embrace the chaos, and they still find a way to profit from it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They've mastered the art of managing uncertainty.
So how do we as traders, how do we adopt that same kind of casino mindset?
Yeah, that's the question, right? I think it boils down to this idea of zooming out. Instead of obsessing over every single trade, like, is this one going to be a winner or a loser?
Right.
We need to focus on the bigger picture. We need to think in terms of probabilities.
So it's not about trying to like bat 1,000. It's more about, having more base hits than strikeouts in the long run.
Exactly. Even the best traders in the world, they have losing trades.
Oh, yeah.
It's inevitable. The key is to not let those losses throw you off your game.
Right.
It's about trusting your system, staying disciplined, and letting those probabilities play out over time.
Okay. This is all starting to make a lot of sense to me, but, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking the same thing I am right now, which is like, this is all great in theory, but actually putting it into practice, that's a whole other beast.
Oh, absolutely. And Douglas acknowledges that in the book, he's very clear that, intellectually understanding this stuff and then actually embodying it in your trading, those are two very different things.
Right. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we actually take all of this knowledge and turn it into consistent action?
Well, one of the most helpful things that Douglas offers in the book is what he calls the mechanical stage.
Okay, the mechanical stage. Tell me more.
So this is all about taking as much of the subjectivity, the emotion out of the equation as possible.
So basically like creating a set of rules, a system that we can follow without second guessing ourselves every step of the way.
Exactly. So that means defining your entry and exit points in advance, right? Like before you even enter the trade.
Right.
Establishing very clear risk management parameters. How much are you willing to lose on this trade?
Yeah.
What are your profit targets? All of that is determined before you ever even click the buy or sell button.
So you're basically trying to outsmart your own brain.
In a way, yes. You're creating this external structure that prevents you from making those impulsive emotional decisions in the heat of the moment.
Because we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
Where you have a plan, but then the market starts going crazy and you just chuck the plane out the window.
Exactly. And that's when those big losses tend to happen, right?
Exactly.
So the mechanical stage is all about taking that emotionality out of it.
I love that. And, one of the things that Douglas talks about in the book that I think is really powerful is this idea of predefining your risk.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. He says you should know exactly how much you're willing to lose on a trade before you even enter it.
Which, again, easier said than done, right? It's easy to say, oh, yeah, I can handle a 5% loss on this trade. No problem. But then when you see your hard-earned money, literally vanishing before your eyes.
Yeah, that's when it becomes real, right?
It suddenly becomes very real very quickly.
And that's why, this mental game is so important. It's about getting comfortable with the possibility of loss.
Yeah.
Not letting that fear paralyze you or greed cloud your judgment. It's about being able to make those decisions based on your predefined plan, not on how you're feeling in the moment.
This is gold. This
Yeah.
is what we came for. But, we've thrown a lot of information at our listeners today. So to try to distill this down to one actionable thing that they could do starting right now today to kind of put this into practice,
Yeah.
what would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Douglas actually offers a really cool exercise in the book. He calls it learning to trade an edge like a casino.
Okay. Learning to trade an edge like a casino. I like it.
So essentially what you do is you develop a system, any system. It could be as simple or as complex as you want, but the key is it needs to have very clearly defined rules.
Okay.
And then you commit to taking at least 20 trades without deviating from your plan.
20 trades, no tweaking, no second guessing. Just pure execution.
Exactly. The goal isn't necessarily to win every single one of those 20 trades, right?
Right.
The goal is to train your mind to trust the process.
It's like you're rewiring your brain to think like a casino owner instead of a gambler.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, that's really where the magic happens. Because as Douglas says, the goal of a trader is not to make money. The goal is to trade well.
The goal is to trade well. I love that quote, and that is what we are all about here on The Deep Dive. Helping you trade better, think better, and ultimately live better. For all of us here at The Deep Dive, this has been an incredible exploration into the world of trading psychology, and we hope that you'll join us next time for another deep dive into the world of trading and beyond.